Welcome to the next podcast of Machine Civilization. This is a slowly recovering Clayton Barnett, who will be your host today. As I just mentioned and also wrote yesterday, this podcast is coming out a day late, as most of last week I had some sort of GI bug and was out several days, and even when I attempted to go back to work, I was just exhausted. It's kind of hard to do deliveries and compound IVs when you've had 3 pieces of toast over 36 hours. But nonetheless, I survived. Today, I'm discussing what is essentially a follow-up to last week's about politics, because people have noted in some reviews and some comments that a great many of the nations of the humans in my future history are organized into monarchies, whether it's a kingdom or an empire. The reason for that is I don't have a particular disregard for elected communities at a local level, whether it's going back even in our own history, the city-states of Greece that organized into democracies, even though they used very complicated forms, the Roman Republic, although their system of elections was designed so that only the right people votes mattered. Everyone could vote, but not everyone's vote mattered. Or in the Germanic tribes or Celtic communities of Gaul and Germania, they would have the local thanes and local gatherings, and people would try to work out their issues on a very local tribal basis, what we Catholics would call the doctrine of subsidiarity, trying to solve as many problems as possible at a most local level as possible. And it, by and large, works. It worked for 13 unwieldy colonies who were facing the Atlantic when they tried to form a government back in 1789. And it persisted until that scaled up and pushed inland and became essentially 2 countries just barely held together, and finally was ripped asunder and became an empire, even though it's an elected one, in 1865, eliminating the said Constitution of 1789. And that's the problem of states in the future, and I'm an honest enough writer to recognize it, that what does work at a local city, or to use the U.S. term, county level, does not scale up. It's simply unwieldy to think that a democracy or even a republic can manage a vast land. Now, in the case of the Empire of Japan, it's not that many square miles. Their country's about the same size as California, but it's still pretty large and it's still got a lot of people in it. The Habsburg Empire, the Imperial Danubian Federation, or just the Empire as it's called, also is maybe not so many square miles, but it's a vast collection of very disparate people. You've got Germanics, Slavs, Hungarians, and while they might be fine in their own countries, to attempt to say, well, we're going to have some sort of republic where everyone is equally represented, no, that's absolutely unwieldy, and anyone tells you otherwise is selling you something. Similarly, the Russian Empire, mapping mostly to what Russia territory covers today, plus the recent acquisitions of Alaska, British Columbia, and the former Kingdom of Columbia, that's too vast an area to have any sort of representative government. And then finally also Faustina's Imperium in the former Deep South, she allows and fully understands the usefulness of the local communities. Most of the cities have either councils or have a representative mayor, and she leaves all that alone. A lot of the areas that she creates as part of her new imperium are governed by her aristocracy, the counts, viscounts, and barons that she appoints to oversee and rule the people, who are then directly, personally responsible to her. But if, say, the city-state of Knoxville has a council of 5 governing it, she leaves that completely alone, because they're handling their problems at a local level. But at a non-local level, at the point where you're getting into a very large nation, then the rule has to be one man. I'm trying to recall, but the term was better Tiberius than a committee. Because that's sort of the situation we find ourselves in. What's left of the United States at this time is we have what some would call the deep state, or just simply the unelected bureaucracy, who run this vast empire of ours. And we have titular elections, which mean absolutely nothing. They don't change policy at all. It just seems to make some of the voters feel better. And I admit, in my future history, that it is better for one person to have the authority. Now, I know this will get up the noses, especially of my American listeners, who are absolutely inculcated in the civil religion of Republican democracy. But really, since 1865, it's been a lie. You've been lied to your whole lives, and it's not normal for a large nation-state to have any sort of elected representatives. The norm throughout all of recorded history is monarchy, and I recognize that. So, besides the Habsburg Empire, we have the Russian Empire, Empire of Japan, Faustina's Imperium, the oligarchy of Mexico. The only relatively large-sized country that still calls itself a republic is that of Texas in my stories. And Texas, of course, is bigger than it is now. It includes legally all of former Oklahoma, half of New Mexico, and they have essentially hegemony over the places like Kansas and the Front Range of the Rocky Mountains. And that was true that they had a functioning republic in some of my earlier books. In the writing exercise called 55,000 word writing exercise that I'm doing now, is one of the main characters in part 1 realizes and sees with his own eyes that there are a lot of stresses in the current Texas government. And the Texans are realizing that they are simply getting too big to function as a republic. They don't want to admit that to themselves, just like Americans don't want to admit that to themselves now. But I've come to see it in my stories. I don't know exactly how it's going to play out, but at least I recognize that, yeah, when it was just them after the breakup, they saw themselves as a resumption of the Texas Republic of the 19th century. But there's too much going on, and there's no way that, again, a committee, or to use the more blunt term, an oligarchy, can hold their country together. And it's going to take one person to do that. Now, in context of the future history of machine civilization, sometimes those persons aren't human. In the case of the Russian Empire, yes, they do have the Romanov family back on the throne as Tsar, Tsarina, and then the princes and princesses that I'm currently writing about. But all real power is held by the Prime Minister, Reina, and Reina is an AI who has absolutely no intention of sharing power or letting go of it. In the Imperium, Faustina is DemiHuman, so she thinks very faster and very much different than humans do, and also, I believe, is continuing to make biomedical modifications to herself, because when she's, at one point I have somebody say, for somebody who's 43, she looks like she's 30, and in Emperor's Crusade, one of her legates says, just how long do you intend on living? And she replied, forever. Now that's really not biologically possible, but I do believe DemiHumans will probably live at least twice as long as humans do. So once again, as Jerry Pournelle aptly put it, you need a system of government that looks to the next generation and not to the next election, or even worse, to the next quarterly statement. And right now, many of the problems facing our world is that people don't look any further than 3 months out or 2 years out. It's best to have someone who can rule, who looks to their children and their grandchildren as their people, and not to the plutocrats and the bankers and the accountants as their people. This was a little shorter than some of my other podcasts, but then again, I don't think I'm completely back up to par. I'll try to do better next week. And also, I didn't want to make this too cerebral. I did have several notes where I was referencing very specifically types of the Greek constitutions and also the unwritten Roman constitutions going into their different assemblies, comitia. But I thought I would just try to do this free range without notes and try to keep it in tune with machine civilization as best I can. And I think I did that. Once again, I appreciate everyone's listening, and I apologize that this is a day late, but I'm doing what I can. I look forward to letting y'all hear more next Friday. This is Clayton Barnett. Thank you.